I lent my sister $7,000 and to solve her big problem. But a week later, my uncle sent me her photo from Hawaii. Life is easy, wrote there. So I did this and received 24 missed calls. Jessica showed up at my apartment late one night, looking desperate. She wasn't the type to show up unannounced, and she definitely wasn't the type to ask for help. That alone made me uneasy. The moment I opened the door, she pushed past me and went straight to the couch, sitting down as if her legs were about to give out. I closed the door and asked her what was wrong. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaled sharply, and said she needed money. A lot of money. $7,000. I blinked. $7,000 wasn't pocket change. For her to need that kind of money, urgently, meant that something serious had happened. I asked what was wrong. She looked away, hesitated, then mumbled that it was a big problem. She wouldn't say exactly what, just kept repeating that she was in trouble, that she had no other options, and that she desperately needed my help. I could tell she was trying to hold back tears. Jessica wasn't someone who cried easily. That's what made it all so convincing. I began to think of all the possibilities. Maybe she had been in a car accident and had to pay damages. Maybe she got fired and had to make rent before she got evicted. Maybe something worse. My mind went to every dark place. I asked her if she was okay, if she was in any danger. She shook her head quickly and said she wasn't, but it was urgent, and she couldn't give me the details. I let out a breath. I wasn't sure what to say. It didn't feel right to give her so much money without knowing why she needed it. But at the same time, this was my sister. If she came to me for help, things had to be bad. After a few moments, I told her that I'd do it. I'd give her the money. And because she was my sister, I wouldn't ask for it back. If she was in a bad place, I didn't want to make things harder for her by turning this into a debt. I said that if she ever got back on her feet and wanted to pay me back, she could, but I didn't expect anything. Jessica looked stunned, like she didn't expect me to say yes so quickly. Then she hugged me and started thanking me over and over again. I felt good at the time. I felt I was doing the right thing. I had no idea how wrong I was. A week passed. Jessica barely texted me. I figured she was still dealing with whatever mess she was in, so I didn't push. I told myself I had done my part, helped my sister when she needed me, and that was enough. Then out of the blue, I got a message from my uncle. It was just a picture. No text, no explanation. Just a picture. It took me a second to process what I was seeing. Jessica, lying on a lounge chair by the pool, sunglasses on, cocktail in hand. The background was unmistakable palm trees, clear blue sky, a fancy resort pool. This wasn't just any vacation. It was Hawaii. And the caption on the post? Life is simple. I stared down at my phone, my mind refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing. I immediately opened Instagram to check out her profile, but when I searched for her name, nothing came up. Confused, I clicked on my uncle's message again. That's when I noticed something else, her username. It was still the same. She had blocked me. My stomach sank. Still trying to make sense of it, I texted my uncle. When was this posted? His reply came almost immediately. A screenshot. It showed Jessica's post, time-stamped 4 hours ago. I felt like an idiot. She hadn't been in trouble. She hadn't needed the money for an emergency. She had lied, looked me in the eye, pretended to be desperate. Let me worry about her, just so she could take a luxury vacation. And blocking me? That was the icing on the cake. She knew what she was doing. She took my money and didn't even want me to see what she was doing with it. And the worst part? She wasn't alone. In the photo sitting next to her in the pool was a guy I had never seen before. A burly, tan guy, probably Mexican, with tattoos all over his arms. His arm was casually draped over her legs, as if they were having the time of their lives. My blood was boiling. I sat there for a long time, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The first thing I wanted to do was call them. I wanted to demand an explanation, to catch her off guard, to hear whatever pathetic excuse she could come up with. But then I stopped myself. No, let her think she got away with it. Let her think she's the smartest person in the room. I wanted to make sure she regretted it. I didn't say anything to Jessica. I wanted to see how far she'd take this. Instead, I called my parents. I casually asked if they had heard from her recently. My mom said that Jessica had been super busy with work and that she hadn't been home much. My dad added that she was probably stressed and just needed time to figure things out. I almost laughed. She wasn't home because she was sipping cocktails in Hawaii. I played along. I told them I'd been thinking about visiting her since she lived alone and might want some company. My mother thought it was a great idea. My dad agreed and said Jessica would love to see me. But when I called Jessica and floated the idea, she immediately shut it down. She made one excuse after another. She said she was really busy, that her apartment was a mess, that she had a lot of work to do. I just kept nodding, pretending to believe her. Then, just to mess with her, I said it wasn't a big deal, I could come over next weekend instead. That's when she panicked. She suddenly remembered that she had a business trip coming up. Wouldn't be home. No chance to meet. Sorry. I smiled to myself. That's when I finally hit her with it. I told her it was okay, that I already knew the truth. She fell silent. I let the silence linger for a few seconds before I continued. I told her that I had seen the pictures, that her uncle had sent them to me, that she could drop the act because I knew she wasn't drowning in problems. She was lounging at a resort with some guy, pretending life was easy while spending my money. That's when she lost it. She started screaming into the phone that it wasn't like that I didn't understand, that I was overreacting. I stayed calm, let her dig her own grave, let her get angrier and angrier. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I told her this. She had two choices: pay me back every last dollar, or things were going to get very difficult for her. She screamed something unintelligible, but I had already hung up. Almost immediately, my phone began to explode. Call after call, text after text. I ignored them all. After the 20th missed call, I blocked them. I wasn't going to go after her for the money. I was going to wait for her to come back. A week passed. I knew Jessica was back when my uncle texted me again. She deleted the Hawaii posts. Classic move. Pretend it never happened. Erased the evidence. Maybe she thought if she scrubbed her Instagram clean, I'd forget the whole thing. Then, the next night, there was a knock on my door. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Jessica was standing there with her arms crossed, trying to look composed, but failing miserably. I opened the door without saying a word and just stared at her. She let out this fake, dramatic sigh and then walked in, as if she was doing me a favor by showing up. She started talking right away. Said she wanted to explain, that things weren't what they seemed, that she had a reason for what she was doing. I just sat on the couch with my arms crossed and let her ramble. She said she really needed a break, that she was burned out and mentally exhausted, that she never gets to do anything nice for herself, and that she just wanted to feel normal. I stared at her. She didn't apologize. She wasn't even acting guilty. She was justifying it, like I should understand why she cheated me out of $7,000. That's when I laughed. I asked her if she really thought I'd ever trust her again. I told her she set me up and thought I'd just sit there and take it, and that she had the audacity to pretend to be the victim. She got defensive, said I was making a big deal out of nothing. That was only $7,000, that I wasn't fighting for money, so why did I care so much? That's when I snapped. I told her straight up I was done. I wasn't going to help her anymore. No more rent. No more money. Nothing. She looked shocked, as if the thought had never occurred to her. Like she assumed she could just keep using me whenever she wanted. She started to argue again, but I was done listening. I opened the door and told her to get out. She tried one last thing, put on a sad face, made her voice all soft, asked if I was really going to hold this against her. I didn't even answer. I just slammed the door in her face. 2 days later, I got a phone call from my parents. They wanted me to come over. They said they needed to talk to me about something important. I had a pretty good idea what it was, but I went anyway. When I got to their house, Jessica was already there. She was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, looking like an innocent victim who had been wronged. I barely had time to sit down before my mother came in. She said that Jessica had told them everything and that she felt terrible about what had happened, that she knew she had made a mistake and wanted to apologize. Then Jessica spoke. She looked at me, sighed dramatically, and said, "It's only 7,000, Eric. I'm sorry." I stared at her. That was it. That was supposed to make me forgive her? She didn't even apologize for lying. She just acted like I was being unreasonable for being upset. I leaned back in my chair and asked my parents if they were really buying this, if they really thought she had learned anything. They said she wasn't perfect and that everyone makes mistakes. Then came the real reason I was there. They wanted me to forgive her, not because she deserved it, but because families should stick together. I couldn't believe it. Jessica sat there watching me, waiting to see if I'd give in. I took a deep breath and said, fine, I would forget about it. I wouldn't hold it against her, but I wouldn't help her anymore. No more rent money. Nothing. Jessica's face twitched for a second, as if she hadn't expected me to say that. Then she said, okay. That was all I needed to hear. I left in a bad mood, knowing this wasn't over. A month passed. Jessica and I hadn't spoken since that night at my parents' house, and frankly, I didn't care. I was done with her. Done with the drama, the lies, all of it. Then my parents showed up unannounced to my apartment. I opened the door, already knowing this wasn't going to be a friendly visit. They looked serious, like something was really wrong. I let them in, and my dad wasted no time. Jessica was in trouble. Real trouble this time. She had taken out some microloans, short-term loans with sky-high interest rates to cover her expenses. But instead of using the money wisely, she had gambled most of it away in an online casino. I blinked. Online casino? My mother nodded, looking stressed. Jessica had kept it a secret until the debt got out of control. Now the lenders were hitting her with massive interest charges, and she owed far more than she could afford to pay back. She had gone to them for help, but they didn't have enough to cover it. So now they were asking me. I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. My dad sighed. Eric, we know she messed up, but this is serious. She's drowning in debt. If she doesn't pay up soon, things could get really bad. I leaned back with my arms crossed. How much does she owe? My mother hesitated. Then she said it. Almost $10,000. I let out a low whistle. Jessica had really outdone herself this time. Then my dad added, and it's growing every day. I almost laughed. I told them no. Their faces fell. My mom immediately started pleading, saying that Jessica was really trying, that she was scared, that this wasn't like last time, that she wasn't trying to trick me this time. She was really desperate. I shrugged. She was desperate last time too, remember? Desperate for a free vacation. My mom's expression tightened. Eric, this is different. She didn't do it on purpose. She made a mistake. People make mistakes. I shook my head. No, Mom. A mistake is something you regret. Jessica doesn't regret anything. She only regrets getting caught. That's when my mom snapped, her voice sharp. Eric, she's your sister. How can you be so selfish? I stared at her stunned. Selfish. I had given Jessica $7,000. Paid her rent for 2 months. She had lied to my face, blocked me, used my money to party in Hawaii with some random guy. And somehow, I was the selfish one. I stood up and shook my head. I'm not giving her a dime. If she dug herself into this hole, she can dig herself out. My dad looked frustrated, but he didn't argue. He just sighed and said, fine. But don't say we didn't warn you. They left disappointed. A week later, I got a call from my uncle. The second I picked up the phone, he was laughing. So do you know who your sister borrowed money from? I frowned. What? My wife, he said, still laughing. Jessica begged her for help. Said she had nowhere else to turn. I sat back and processed. Jessica had burned every bridge, and now she had to crawl to my uncle's wife, someone who would make her pay back every cent. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Jessica never called me, never texted, nothing. I figured she was too embarrassed, or more likely, too pissed that I hadn't bailed her out. And honestly, that was fine with me. I had no interest in hearing whatever excuse she'd come up with this time. But then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my aunt. Now, my uncle's wife, and Linda, wasn't someone who usually got involved in family drama. She was blunt, no nonsense, and she didn't take crap from anybody. So when I saw her name on my phone, I knew something was up. I answered, and the first thing she said was, "Eric, I need to ask you something, and I want the truth." I frowned. "Okay." She sighed. "Did Jessica ever tell you how much she owed you?" I hesitated. "Yeah. My parents said about 10,000. Silence. Then she said, "That's funny, because when she came to me for help, she said it was 15. I sat up straight. "What?" "Yes." She cried and said she was going to lose everything if I didn't help her. So I gave her the money, told her she better pay me back every cent. But something didn't sit right with me, so I checked out her story. Aunt Linda made a few phone calls, did some digging. It turned out that Jessica had lied again. She hadn't owed 15 grand. She hadn't even owed 10. She had owed 6. Jessica had inflated the number so she could pocket the extra cash. Even when she was supposedly at rock bottom, she was still scamming people. I ran my hand down my face. "So what did you do?" Aunt Linda chuckled. "Oh, don't worry. She won't get away with it this time." And she told me what she had done. Jessica had expected to make small payments, stretching out the debt so she could continue to live comfortably. But Aunt Linda wasn't having any of it. She gave Jessica a week to pay back the extra money, or she'd take it to my parents. And if Jessica didn't have it, Aunt Linda would make her work for it. And knowing Aunt Linda, that probably meant scrubbing floors, running errands, and doing whatever miserable job she could think of until the debt was paid. Jessica had freaked out. She begged, pleaded, tried to wiggle out of it, but Aunt Linda shut her down. Told her she was lucky she didn't go straight to the police. I couldn't help but laugh. For once, Jessica had tricked the wrong person. And this time, she wasn't going to get away with it. A week passed. I didn't hear from Jessica. Then one night, I got a call from my mother. I debated ignoring it, but something told me to answer it. The moment I did, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was tense. "Eric, can you come over? It's important." I sighed. "Is it about Jessica?" "Because—" "Just come." She hung up before I could argue. I considered calling it off, but curiosity got the better of me. If this was just another attempt to get me to forgive Jessica, I'd leave. Simple. But when I got there, I walked into something I never expected. Jessica sat at the kitchen table, but she didn't look smug, angry, or defensive like last time. She looked devastated. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles were white. She didn't even look up when I walked in. Then my dad spoke. "Eric, your sister has something to tell you." Jessica swallowed hard, then finally looked at me. "I lost my job." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I got fired." I wasn't surprised. She had missed work, probably used up all her sick days while in Hawaii. But something still didn't add up. Then my mom said it's worse than that. I crossed my arms. "How?" Jessica's lips quivered. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Aunt Linda told them." It hit me like a brick. Aunt Linda must have made good on her threat. She must have told my parents everything, how Jessica had cheated me, how she had cheated them, and how she had lied about the amount of the loan. But that still didn't explain why she'd lost her job. I looked at my parents. My dad exhaled. "Your aunt didn't just tell us. She told Jessica's boss." My eyes widened. Aunt Linda must have found out that Jessica's company had a strict policy about financial dishonesty. If you were caught stealing or lying about money, Even outside of work, you could be fired for ethical misconduct. Jessica had made payments to Aunt Linda, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Her company fired her immediately. I sat down slowly and took it in. Jessica had lost everything. No money, no job, no way to pay rent. I looked at my parents. So what? You wanted to fix this? My mom hesitated. My dad cleared his throat. We're not asking for money, Eric. We don't know what to do. Jessica suddenly looked up at me, despair in her eyes. Eric, please. I know I messed up. I'll do anything, I just need help. I stared at her for a long time. This was the first time she had ever admitted that she was wrong. The first time she didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify anything. It was the first time I saw fear in her face. And I realized something. She had finally hit rock bottom. I stood up. Jessica, I hope you find out. And then I walked out. Months went by. I never reached out to Jessica. She never reached out to me. From what I heard through my uncle, she was barely scraping by. After she was fired, she had no choice but to leave her apartment. At first, she tried to stay with my parents, but even they got tired of her. Eventually, they realized that I had been right all along. She wasn't a victim. She did this to herself. And after all the lies, all the manipulation, they were done too. They stopped bailing her out. So Jessica was on her own. She moved into a tiny apartment with two strangers she found online. She got a job at a diner, working long shifts just to cover rent and food. No vacations, no luxuries, just survival. And honestly, that was fine with me. I had cut off contact with her. I cut off contact with my parents too. After they called me selfish for refusing to clean up her mess, I realized something I didn't owe them anything. Not my money, not my time, not my energy. So I walked away. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I just didn't care. Jessica had spent years using people, taking and taking, never thinking of the consequences. She always assumed that someone would catch her before she hit the ground. But this time no one did. And for the first time in her life, she was finally learning what it meant to be on her own.